Hello, guys. Today we're going to take some notes on the legislative branch. The reason I'm doing notes this way instead of the way you might have done in the past, where the teacher writes them on the board or the teacher talks while there's a PowerPoint or a Google Slides presentation. The reason we're going to do it this way is that you can do it at your own pace. So if you want to pause and ask a question about something, or you want to pause it and look something up your own self, or if you want to pause it and just take your time writing. Maybe you're tired of writing for a minute, you take a little break or something. That's fine. Okay, so the main thing is you need to have these notes written down because they're important. We will have a test next Friday. So next Friday, I believe it's October 4th, we'll have a test. And what we're going to do is have that test, and then the quarter ends the middle of the next week. So if you need to retake it or you want to try to do better on it, you'll have a couple days. I don't want to have the test be at the very end of the quarter, and then you have no time to make it up if you need be. So um, just make sure you get these notes down, all the notes written down. If you want to use your own little shorthand, that's fine. It's up to you, but just make sure you get these notes down one way or the other. Okay? So here we go. This is the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., you'll notice that, or you'll know rather, that this area is filled with all sorts of very famous monuments. So, right along here is near the National Mall, which has a Smithsonian around it. You'll be able to see the Washington Monument. You'll be able to see the even the Jefferson Memorial from this area, a Lincoln Memorial. You can see a lot of stuff. So this is the Capitol building, which is where Congress is, and Congress is both the House of Representatives and the Senate. They both meet together in this building, and that's where all the laws get made. At least when they pass laws the old-fashioned way, which doesn't happen as much anymore. But this is also where they have the State of the Union speech, where the president will give a speech once a year, sort of explaining, what he or eventually she thinks is going on with the country and what they want to do and why things aren't getting done, all that sort of stuff. And they meet in this one building. And what's interesting is they have somebody called a designated survivor. And so, since they have all these people here, the president, the vice president, all the people in the House and Senate, plus the Supreme Court justices, there's one person whose job it is to get out of the way and stay away from there in case something happens. So if something happens, an alien blows up all of Congress and the president and the Supreme Court, there'll be one person that's in charge of the government. So there's always one person who's a designated survivor for that, and they're in an undisclosed location. Um, generally that's not something we have to worry about, but I guess they just do it just in case. All right, this is what the inside of the Congress looks like. Okay, if you look sort of in the middle there, you can see somebody's talking. I'm not sure if this was taken during a State of the Union or not. A lot of times people are in there just talking their ears off, talking your ear off. Oftentimes they're not doing real debate. Sometimes they'll do something here called a filibuster, where if they don't want a law to pass, they can essentially make the debate over the law last forever, or as long as they can last. And so people will do filibusters every now and then. It never actually stops the bill from passing, but it gets them on TV and makes them seem like they care about that issue. It's mostly, like a lot of things in politics, it's about showing off. It's not really about accomplishments. All right. This is a map of the state of Alabama's congressional districts. Sometimes these change. They generally try to make it so the people are equal between all three of them, or sorry, all seven of them. Every state has their own, but if you look at this map, One thing you'll notice is they carve out a specific part of Birmingham to make it District 7. Um, if you look around Montgomery, there's this weird strip that goes up through Montgomery and then goes into Autauga and Elmore counties. Um, a lot of times what they do is something called gerrymandering. And gerrymandering is when they divide up congressional districts in such a way that one political party will tend to win. You could have a situation in which it's 50% one group and 50% the other, but you can divide it up. So if you have, say, 4 congressional districts, you can somehow divide it up so it ends up being 3-1 and not 2-2, even though overall it's a mix. And so that's one of the things that they do on this one, is you can see that little strip going from Birmingham down into the rest of the 7th congressional district. It can be kind of confusing on why they do that. Well, they do that because they want to make sure that they keep power, because again, that's what politicians are generally trying to do. And the one district in Alabama that tends to run Democrat is District 7, which is that part of Birmingham all the way down into Tuscaloosa and that area. Most of you, I assume, will live in District 6, which is the same district that I live in. And so if you look at Hoover on the map, you can see Hoover is very close to District 7. So you can almost walk there to District 7. It's that close. But if you live in Birmingham, it depends on where you live. You might be District 7, you might be District 6. But if you look other places, it's along county lines. It makes a little bit more sense. But sometimes they divide it up because they're trying to keep political power with a certain party. Because right now you have 6 Republicans in Congress from Alabama and the 1 Democrat. And the 1 Democrat is in District 7. If they divvied it up a little more naturally, it might be 5-2. So we talked about this before. We have a 2-house legislature, meaning you have to get 2 different groups of people to agree on any laws. You can't simply say, this one group will pass it. Now, if you remember from the Articles of Confederation, they did have a single house that made all the rules, but not anymore. So you have the Senate. Okay, the Senate is probably the most prestigious of the 2, or the more prestigious of the 2. There's 2 per state, so there's 100 total senators. There's 2 from Alabama, 2 from California, 2 from Montana, 2 from every state. So even though California has, 10 times as many people as Alabama, they have the exact same representation. And some people don't like that because they want it to be based on pure popular vote and popularity. But remember, with the Constitution, each state was sovereign. And so smaller states would not want to have a whole lot less power than larger states. They wanted to have more equality. Now, the small states wanted to have just as much power as the big states, and so they weren't able to pass that. But they were able to have 2 houses of legislature. One, the Senate, is based on being equal. So Vermont has as many senators as Texas, and then we'll get to the House later, where it actually is based on population. If you're in the Senate, you serve for 6 years, 6 years each. There are no limits on House or Senate seats, so you can be in there forever. And there have been people that have served for over 50 years. There are a lot of senators that, I guess y'all aren't that old, but there are senators that have been in the Senate since before I was born, okay? But they serve 6 years a pop. So if you get reelected twice, that's 18 years after your first term. You have to be 30. So I am luckily old enough to run for Senate if I wanted to. 30, not that old. Generally, the kind of person who's going to be a senator has probably more life experience than that anyway, but 30 is the minimum. You have to be a citizen for 9 years. So this is different than the president. Remember, the president, you had to be a natural-born citizen, and you had to have been living in the U.S. for 14 years. But for the Senate, you only have to have been a citizen for 9 years. So anybody in the world could theoretically become a senator if they became an American citizen and had been a citizen for 9 years. So if you become a citizen on your 21st birthday, then you can become a senator when you're 30. Okay? You don't have to be born a a U.S. citizen. Now, so there's 100 people in the Senate. You have a majority leader who is the person who's the head of the party in charge. Right now, the Republicans are in charge. So the majority leader right now is a guy named Mitch McConnell. Okay? And generally, the leaders of the political parties are very good at getting stuff done. Okay? It's not necessarily a popularity contest. It's about who can get things done. Because a lot of times people don't necessarily like the majority leader. Most Democrats do not like Mitch McConnell. And that's because Mitch McConnell does what the Republicans want, and he's actually fairly good at it because that's how he gets the power. Because he's allowed to, he's able to get people to vote the way he wants and things like that. Now you have a minority leader. The minority leader is the head of the party that's not in charge. So the head of the Democrats in the Senate is a guy named Chuck Schumer, who is from New York. And Chuck Schumer, if the Democrats took power over the Senate in the 2020 election, Chuck Schumer will become the majority leader. Okay? And every now and then they can switch people out. If they don't like the leader, they can just vote them out. They're voted on by that party. So if you're a Republican senator, you can vote on the majority leader. If you're a Democrat senator, you can vote on the minority leader. Okay? But generally, they stay in power for a while because they're pretty good at their job. Now, this is something that can be confusing. The head of the president, the president of the Senate, rather, in the Senate is the vice president. Technically, in the Constitution, the only job the vice president has is to be the head of the Senate. But he doesn't really do that, okay? If there is a tie in the Senate, because it's a 50-50, there could be a 50-50 split. If there's a tie in the Senate, the vice president gets to vote in that case and break the tie. And that's really all the vice president is supposed to do. But the vice president is not going to hang out in the Senate the whole time. So they have somebody who does that for him. That's called the president pro tempore, which is the president of the Senate for the vice president. What that means is Mike Pence is the Senate president technically. But he is not there all the time. He is usually doing presidential stuff. So Mike Pence is not hanging out around the Senate. So they have somebody do that for him. That's what pro tempore means. Pro means for, tempore means time. So president for the time being. Essentially, it's a substitute. Okay? That's another important position in the Senate. The current president pro tempore is, actually just switched. It's usually not a person that's really, I wouldn't say isn't important, but it's usually somebody who's been around a while. It's not a position that really does a whole lot, but it's something they give older people. And right now it's a guy named Chuck Grassley, who's a senator. He's the current president pro tempore. All right. So next, let's talk about the House. If I can get this. All right, House of Representatives. Now that is based on population. So the larger states have more representatives. Okay, so Alabama has 7. California has, I believe, 53. Florida has, I think, 27. Montana, North Dakota, a lot of these other states only have 1. Okay, so in the Senate, everybody's equal. In the House, it's not so much equal. So, if you're the senator from Montana, you have just as much voting power as a senator from California. But if you're in the House of Representatives, well, there's 53 people from California, and you're probably the only one from your state of Montana. You are from Montana and several other states. Some states might have 2. But the larger states have more power. So it's more democratic than the Senate is. But the purpose is not necessarily to be democratic, because remember, the states were originally sovereign and could do whatever they wanted. They worked together for common interests, and they wouldn't have ever worked together in the first place if they had been told, well, eventually we're just going to do whatever the big states want. Okay? So that's why a lot of times in the House of Representatives, they can get laws passed, they can get bills, not laws yet. They can get bills passed, but the problem is those bills won't pass the Senate, because you can get people from California and Florida and Illinois and New York to get laws, or bills passed, but they don't get past the Senate because the Senate doesn't agree with what they do. Because the Senate, the smaller states have a little bit more power. Now, Alabama has 7. We talked about that. I believe where we are in Hoover, your representative would be Gary Palmer. So it's 435 total. They serve 2-year terms, which is actually pretty tricky. It means that they're always running for re-election. Because if you get elected in November of 2020, you will take office in January 2021. It takes 2 months between getting elected and then actually getting sworn in. But once you've been sworn in, oh no, you only have 20 months or so, 22 months before your next election. And so it's a constant running for election all the time. And, if you're unpopular, sometimes you get what they call primaried. That's where somebody in your own party runs against you. Those elections happen even earlier. And so sometimes you're just literally doing nothing but running for election all the time. So 2-year terms. The good thing about that is if you don't like your representative, they're not in there very long. You can vote them out. Okay. You have to be 25. So it's not as stringent as the Senate. Okay. You only have to be 25. You have to be a citizen for 7 years. Again, you don't have to be born a citizen. So every single student, whether you are a citizen or not, you can become a representative, okay? But you just have to be a citizen for 7 years. So if you became a citizen on your 18th birthday, when you became eligible to serve as a representative when you're 25, you'd be set. Now, the most important position, probably more important than anything in the Senate, is what's called Speaker of the House. They are in charge of the House of Representatives, okay? They kind of dictate what happens. So they can say we want to vote on this bill or we want to vote on this or whatever they want to do. They have a lot of power, okay? They can decide, for example, if you're a representative and you are not on friendly terms with a Speaker of the House, you're not going to get to be in charge of important committees. And committees are where they decide on bills and things. So you might be elected, but you might not be able to do anything other than vote. You might not have the power to bring bills to committee or introduce bills or anything like that. Now, the House of Representatives is currently controlled by the Democrats. So our 2 houses, one part Senate, the Senate's Republican, and the Democrats are in control of the House of Representatives, which means a lot of things don't get passed because they don't agree on things. Because what the Senate wants to pass is not what the House wants to pass. Okay, and so the only things that tend to get passed are things that everybody agrees on. But for example, one of the things that they've talked about is impeaching President Trump. And impeaching means that the House of Representatives is going to essentially bring charges against the president for doing something wrong. But once they've been impeached, well, the Senate has to vote on whether or not to kick them out of office. Well, kicking them out of office requires a 2/3 vote. And that would require over almost 20 Republicans voting to remove Donald Trump as president. Now, if he did that, it would become Mike Pence would become president. But they can impeach Donald Trump, meaning they're going to bring charges against him. But it's not going to go anywhere because it's the Democrats can get it maybe through the House, but the Senate's definitely not going to agree to it. But that's not really the point. the point is to sort of show your displeasure. So you can say we tried to impeach the president, but the chances of him actually getting removed from office are 0.0001. They're very low. Okay, because generally people are not going to vote to remove their own party from power. We've had a couple presidents get impeached in the past. We've never had one removed from office. Nixon would have got removed from office if he had stayed in, but that would be the one exception. Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton were both impeached, but when it went to the Senate, neither of them were actually kicked out. Okay. Whoops. All right, clicking through. Oh, there we go. All right, so these are the leaders. So if you look at the top left, that is Nancy Pelosi. She is from California. She's been the Speaker of the House more than once. She is very good at what she does. Okay, she's very good at what she does. She is in charge. She can decide who's in charge of what committee and all that sort of thing. But she's been in office for a long time, and I'm trying to see if I can look up how long she's been in office, but it's been a long time. Whoops. So she has been. Whoops. I can get this. Nancy Pelosi has been in office for a very long time. Although it's not, I guess not super. Since 1987, so 32 years. She has been in the House of Representatives, and she's slowly moved her way up until now. She's the most important person in there. Okay. This next guy you see, who's looking, below her, who's looking kind of to the right, that's Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy is the minority leader, and so he is in charge of the Republicans in the House. He doesn't have much say on anything because everything goes through the Speaker of the House, but the Republicans sort of have to answer to him. And then at the top, well, not the top right, on the right, with the red tie and the glasses, the one that's a little bit bigger, that is Mitch McConnell, who is the Senate Majority Leader from Kentucky. And then next to him, that is Chuck Grassley, who is the President pro tempore. And then at the bottom, that is Chuck Schumer. Okay? Chuck Schumer is the Senate Minority Leader. If Republicans lost the Senate and the Democrats took power, Schumer would become the Senate Majority Leader. Now let's talk about a couple clauses real quick, okay? Because the legislative branch makes the laws, but there's some things they can't do. So they can't make a law that says you're not allowed to batten out the president. They wouldn't even try to make that law because that goes against the First Amendment. So there's a couple clauses that are important that determine what they do. Now, the elastic clause is not called the elastic clause. It's actually called the necessary and proper clause. It allows the government to pass laws to do its duty. So any laws they need to pass, for example, to fund the military, well, they can do that because it gives them the power to be in charge of the military. It's in the Constitution, so they're allowed to do that. So they can pass laws related to that. They call it the elastic clause because it's so stretchy. They can pretty much do anything they want because they can say it's necessary and proper to passing laws. So it gets abused a lot. And then you also have the supremacy clause. If there's a conflict between the national laws and the state laws, now when I say national, that could also mean federal. So federal and national means the same thing. When there's a conflict between the states and the federal laws, the federal government wins. So if the Alabama wanted to pass a law that said you're not allowed to say certain things and it went against the First Amendment, well, in that case, the First Amendment would win because federal laws are supreme. One of the things that's interesting about the elastic clause is they have used that to do sorts of things that we probably would not think they would be allowed to do. For example, if you're a farmer, okay, well, during the Great Depression, the government told farmers how much they could plant on their own property, which, again, if you look at the Constitution, does not really give them that power. It does say that Congress can regulate trade among the states, but they've taken that to mean that they can regulate pretty much anything between the states. And so this farmer, was growing more than the government said he was supposed to. But he said, well, I'm not selling it. I'm just using it myself. It's not being sold. It's not crossing state lines. I'm just keeping it on my own property. And the courts actually decided that, you know what, even though you're doing that, you're still violating the law because Congress can regulate trade between the states. And since you are not buying stuff because you're growing it yourself, that impacts trade. Not a lot, but it does. And so they end up, using these clauses to essentially regulate. Not only can you not grow things on your own property if it's above a certain amount, if you even, buy things, not even buy things. If you even purchase something down the road and it doesn't cross state lines, we can regulate that. Okay. When originally the Constitution was set up, they meant Alabama is not going to tax food that comes from Georgia. That's what that was meant to do. But now it's essentially anything at all can be regulated. And that's one of the things that they've used to, for example, pass laws that say you can't, buy or sell any sort of drug. Well, originally, if you wanted to pass that law, you had to pass a constitutional amendment like they did when they outlawed alcohol. But then they said, well, actually, since alcohol travels, or since drugs travel between states, and the Congress has the power to regulate that, we're gonna just regulate it that way. So they found some little loopholes over time. All right, now there's three types of powers. Okay, the three types of powers that they have are enumerated power. When you hear the word enumerated, just think a list. That's all it is, list. Enumerated powers are only for the federal government in D.C. For example, printing money. Only the feds can do that. Having an army. Only the feds can do that. Okay? Rules on naturalization. Only feds can do that. All right? So enumerated powers are only up for the federal government. Nobody else can do anything. Concurrent is both feds and states. So both feds and state governments can pass laws. They can also build roads, and they can also have taxes. So that's a power that both of them can do. You have to pay federal taxes and you have to pay state taxes. All right. And then the last one are reserved. Those are things that are only left up to the states. There's not as much of that anymore as there used to be, but certain things are left up to the states, like how elections are run. Elections are done on a statewide level. Schools mostly are done on a state level. And so, for some, for example, colleges are something that are supposed to be reserved to the states, but most colleges get federal funds, and so it gets a little bit tricky there. Okay. If you have any questions about anything, just raise your hand and I'll come around and help you out. But that's all that we've got for today. Please be sure you've written down these notes. If you have any question at all, let me know, and I can come by and see it because I want to make sure everybody gets everything. All right. So that's the notes for today. Hopefully you wrote everything down. Hopefully you paid attention. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much. If you listen to the very end and you would like to get 2 bonus points to your most recent quiz grade, just send me an email and say, hey, can I have my quiz bonus points? And I'll give them to you, okay? Because I know some people put the headphones down on they're in La La Land. But if you're not in La La Land, get some bonus points. All right? That's it.